One ordinary day, a billionaire named Blake Donovan took a detour that changed one life forever. He didn't just see a hungry boy in a dark alley. He saw potential, courage, and a chance to rewrite destiny. This isn't just a story of charity or wealth. It's about human connection, second chances, and the extraordinary power of one simple act of kindness. Get ready to experience a journey that proves no one is ever truly invisible, and that sometimes all it takes to change a life is one person willing to stop and see. Don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. The sky over the city was gray, not with rain, but with a heaviness that mirrored the life of a boy no one noticed. 14-year-old Eli crouched behind a row of overflowing dumpsters in a narrow alley behind a downtown restaurant. His hoodie was 2 sizes too small, soaked at the edges, and covered in grime. His hands, trembling with cold and hunger, fumbled through torn trash bags, carefully unwrapping half-eaten sandwiches and bruised apples like they were treasure. The lunch rush buzzed just a few meters away. Laughter, coffee cups clinking, servers calling out orders. A different world, separated only by a back door, but no one looked his way. Eli's stomach growled. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. He tried to distract himself, whispering numbers under his breath. He used to be good at math, but the hunger roared louder. A man in a suit walked by at the alley's entrance. He saw Eli, hesitated, then kept walking. A woman pulling her child closer quickened her pace. No one spoke. No one asked. He was invisible. Until he wasn't. A luxury black SUV slowed down just outside the alley. Eli didn't even turn. He was too focused on pulling the plastic lid off a takeout container that smelled barely edible, but still tempting. Then a shadow blocked the light. "Hey," a deep voice said, calm, curious, not harsh like the others. Eli froze. He looked up to see a tall man in an immaculate navy suit standing just a few feet away. He had short salt and pepper hair, a neatly trimmed beard, and the kind of face you'd expect to see on magazine covers, or in rooms with people who never had to think about where their next meal would come from. Behind him, 2 security guards stood alert. But the man, he wasn't looking at Eli with disgust or pity. He was looking at him with something else, something Eli hadn't seen in a long time. Concern. Blake Donovan didn't normally take side streets. His schedule was strict, his routes optimized, his time protected like gold. But today, after an exhausting board meeting and a lunch full of empty conversation, he told his driver to take the long way back to his penthouse. He wanted silence. No media, no investors, no hollow smiles. He leaned back in the leather seat of his SUV, scrolling absently through emails on his phone. But then something outside the window caught his eye. A boy, thin, filthy, hunched over garbage, scavenging behind a restaurant. Blake almost looked away. Almost. But there was something in the boy's movements. Something restrained, methodical. He wasn't desperate. He was focused. Like he'd done this before. Like it was routine. That's what made Blake sit forward. "Stop the car," he said quietly. The driver slowed. The bodyguard in the front seat turned, confused. "Is everything all right, sir?" Blake didn't answer. He opened the door and stepped out. In the alley, the boy didn't notice him at first. He was too busy tearing open a soggy napkin that held a half-eaten slice of pizza. "Excuse me," Blake said, voice steady. The boy froze. Slowly, he turned his head. His eyes were sunken, cheeks hollow, but there was sharpness in his gaze, a quiet pride that startled Blake. "I'm not doing anything wrong," the boy said, voice low, defensive. "I'm not stealing, just hungry." Blake raised his hands. "I know. I'm not here to stop you." The 2 bodyguards had stepped closer, but Blake gave them a subtle glance. "Stay back." They obeyed. He stepped forward slowly, not wanting to scare the boy. "What's your name?" Blake asked. "Eli," the boy answered, cautiously. "Eli," Blake repeated. The name lingered on his tongue. It felt personal. There was a silence, a long one. Then Eli added, almost like an afterthought, "I don't want your money, just food. If that's why you're here." That hit Blake harder than he expected. He could buy buildings, companies, jets. But this kid, this stranger, just wanted a sandwich. Not charity, not pity, just a meal. And in that moment, something shifted in Blake Donovan. A billionaire used to numbers, negotiations, power plays, and yet here, in a dirty alley, he was disarmed by the honesty of a child. He looked at Eli and said the first thing that came naturally, "Let's get you something warm to eat." As Blake took a step toward Eli, extending a hand not to touch, but to offer trust, one of the bodyguards shifted in alarm. "Sir," said Marcus, the taller of the two guards, his voice tight with concern. "We can't let you." Blake raised one hand, silencing him without looking. "I'm fine," he said, eyes still fixed on the boy. "He's not a threat." But Marcus didn't back off. He took a half-step closer, his broad frame casting a long shadow over Eli, whose body instinctively flinched. The boy pulled his hoodie tighter, gripping the straps of his ragged backpack like it was a shield. Blake noticed. "Marcus," he said again, this time more firmly. "Step back." A pause. The kind that says this isn't normal. Blake was a man of control, and this wasn't part of the script. Reluctantly, Marcus nodded and stepped away, exchanging a glance with the other guard, who stayed near the SUV, tense but silent. Blake turned back to Eli, lowering his tone. "I'm sorry about that," he said. "They're just doing their job." Eli looked past him, warily watching the two men in suits. "They don't like me." "They don't know you," Blake replied. "Neither do I, but I'd like to." Eli's face didn't soften. Not yet. He'd learned not to trust smiles, especially from strangers in expensive clothes. But there was a flicker of curiosity, a hesitation in the way he stood, as if some quiet part of him wanted to believe Blake meant it. "I don't need saving," Eli muttered, as if repeating a phrase he'd told himself 1,000 times. "I'm not here to save you," Blake answered. "Just to feed you, that's all." Eli studied him, waiting for the catch, the camera, the laugh, but none came. Finally, he shrugged. "Fine," he said, "but only if I can pick the place." Blake smiled for the first time that day, a real smile, faint but sincere. "You've got a deal." And just like that, the richest man in the city followed a starving boy down the block, with two very confused bodyguards trailing behind. Eli didn't choose a fancy place. He led Blake down 2 blocks and around a corner to a small, half-forgotten diner wedged between a laundromat and a pawn shop. The windows were fogged from the kitchen heat, and a faded neon sign above the door buzzed like it was too tired to stay lit. Blake opened the door for him. A bell chimed overhead as they stepped inside. The smell of frying oil, brewed coffee, and something sweet, maybe cinnamon, filled the air. It wasn't elegant, but it was warm, familiar, real. A waitress glanced up from behind the counter. Her eyes widened at the sight of Blake in his suit, flanked by 2 men in earpieces. But when she saw Eli, her expression softened. "Back again, kid?" she asked. Eli gave a shy nod. Blake noticed. "Back again." They slid into a booth near the window. Eli sat first, curled against the wall like he didn't want to take up too much space. Blake sat across from them, unbothered by the cracked vinyl seats or the chipped salt shakers. The waitress approached with 2 menus. Before she could speak, Eli pointed quickly. "Grilled cheese and tomato soup, please." Blake smiled at the speed of it. No hesitation, no drama. Just someone who knew what he wanted because he'd dreamed about it all day. "And for you?" she asked Blake, almost nervously. He handed the menu back without even glancing. "Same." She raised an eyebrow, but nodded and walked away. There was a moment of silence between them, but not the uncomfortable kind. Just the space where 2 very different worlds were trying to meet in the middle. Eli looked out the window. "You don't have to eat here, you know." "I want to," Blake replied. The boy studied him again, skeptical, but less so now. "You rich or something?" he asked. Blake smirked. "Something like that." Eli leaned back, arms crossed. "You don't look like someone who'd talk to me." "And yet here we are," Blake said, resting his hands on the table. The food arrived fast. The grilled cheese was golden, crisp at the edges, oozing cheese with every bite. The soup was thick and steaming. Eli didn't speak for several minutes. He just ate, slowly, respectfully, like each bite mattered. Blake didn't interrupt. He watched as the boy dipped the sandwich into the soup, his eyes half closed like he was tasting safety, warmth, normalcy. And that's when Blake knew this wasn't going to be a one-time meal. It couldn't be. The last bite of grilled cheese disappeared from Eli's plate, but he didn't rush to speak. He leaned back in the booth, hands folded in his lap. His eyes flicked toward the window, watching people pass outside, families, couples, kids with backpacks, people with places to be, people with homes. Blake noticed the change in his expression. A quiet stillness, heavy and resigned. "You're not from around here, are you?" Blake asked softly. Eli hesitated, then gave a small shrug. "I've been in a lot of places. Doesn't really matter where. But where were you before the alley?" Blake asked, not pushing, just opening the door. Another pause. Eli looked down at his hands. "I was in a foster home outside the city," he said at last. "Fourth one in 2 years. The guy there, ... he wasn't like you. Let's just say he liked being in control." Blake didn't interrupt. He didn't ask for details. He just listened. "My mom died last year, liver cancer. We didn't even know she was sick until it was too late," Eli continued, voice flat, like he'd told the story too many times in his head. "We were living in a one-bedroom. She worked nights at a diner, same kind of place as this." "And your father?" Blake asked gently. Eli looked up, eyes sharper now. "Gone. He took off when I was 8. Drugs, I think. Mom never talked about it. She always said, 'Don't waste your heart on people who walk away.'" Blake nodded slowly, those words sinking deep. "Don't waste your heart on people who walk away." There was truth in them, and pain. "I tried the group homes after she passed," Eli went on, "but I couldn't take it. The rules, the yelling, the way they looked at us, like we were broken things." "So you ran," Blake said. Eli didn't deny it. He just looked him in the eye and replied, "Yeah, I ran." Outside, the clouds shifted, casting a narrow beam of light across the window and onto Eli's face. It illuminated the dirt, the bruises, the exhaustion, but also the strength. The kind that doesn't scream. The kind that survives. Blake leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "That couldn't have been easy." Eli shrugged again, but this time there was something different behind it. A crack in the armor. "You don't have to pretend to care," he said. "I'm not pretending," Blake answered quietly. And for a second, just a second, Eli believed him. The sun had begun to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows through the diner window. Outside, the city moved with the same indifference as always, but inside that quiet booth, 2 lives hung in a delicate balance. Blake Donovan stirred the last of his now cold tomato soup with his spoon, barely tasting it. He wasn't hungry. Not for food. He was hungry for clarity. Eli sat across from him, arms folded, chin tucked slightly, the look of someone prepared to be left behind again. Blake could feel it. He had seen that same look before, in the mirror. Years ago, before the money, before the headlines. There had been someone in Blake's life, a younger brother named Nathan, fragile, brilliant, sensitive, a boy who believed in people far more than people deserved. A boy Blake couldn't protect when it mattered most. Nathan had died at 19. Blake had never forgiven himself. He blinked the memory away, his jaw tightening. Now, here was another boy. Different, yes. But there was something hauntingly familiar in Eli's voice, his posture, his guardedness. The same sharp mind buried under pain. The same unspoken plea, "Don't walk away." And yet, Blake glanced at his Rolex. Meetings. Contracts. A dinner with the mayor. His assistant was probably already calling the driver, wondering why he hadn't responded in over an hour. He could go back to his world, let the system handle the boy, donate something, hire someone, the usual. But as he looked at Eli, this half-starved, sharp-tongued, quietly brilliant boy sitting across from him, that option felt hollow. "You look like you're about to do something stupid," Eli muttered suddenly, breaking the silence. Blake raised an eyebrow. "Yeah? And what makes you say that?" "Because people like you don't sit in diners with kids like me unless they're trying to prove something to themselves." Blake gave a soft chuckle, not because it was funny, but because the kid wasn't wrong. "I'm not trying to prove anything," Blake said. "I just don't want to walk away this time." Eli stared at him, blinking slowly. This time? Blake didn't explain. He didn't owe that to Eli. Not yet. But he owed something. He stood up and reached into his coat pocket. For a moment, Eli tensed. Old instincts. But Blake simply laid a business card on the table, his name embossed in silver. Blake Donovan, CEO, Donovan Tech Group, private contact. Eli stared at it like it was a museum artifact. "You want to take a shower, eat something real, and sleep somewhere safe tonight," Blake said calmly. "You get in the car with me. No strings attached. No promises. Just ... warmth." Eli looked from the card to Blake. Suspicion still lived in his eyes. But behind it, buried deep, was something else. Hope. And for Blake, that was more terrifying than any business risk he'd ever taken. Because hope meant responsibility, and responsibility meant heart. And Blake Donovan hadn't used his in a very, very long time. The silence between them stretched, thick with tension and unspoken fears. Eli didn't touch the business card. He stared at it like it might disappear if he blinked, or explode if he picked it up. Blake remained standing by the table, calm but alert. He knew the decision couldn't be rushed. Not for a kid like Eli. Not when every adult in his life had left him behind or used him up. "I don't do favors," Eli said finally, without looking up. "Not for free." Blake softened his voice. "It's not a favor. It's just a night off, a chance to breathe, if you want it." Eli studied him for a long moment, and glanced out the window again. The wind had picked up. The sky was darker now, clouds creeping in over the rooftops. The idea of another night in a freezing alley suddenly felt heavier than usual. Still, trust didn't come easy. "How do I know you won't dump me off at a shelter?" Eli asked. "Or call the cops the second I fall asleep?" "You don't," Blake replied honestly. "You just have to decide whether you want to risk one more person or not." Eli's lips pressed into a line. He reached forward, slowly, and slid the card off the table into his pocket. Then he stood. No dramatic speeches. No thank you. Just movement. Hesitant, guarded, but deliberate. Blake nodded once and turned toward the door. The guards, who had been waiting just outside, straightened up as they saw the two walking out together. "Sir?" Marcus asked, confused. "He's with me," Blake said simply. Eli flinched at the phrasing "with me," but said nothing. As they approached the sleek black SUV, the driver opened the door, unsure whether to hide his shock or just accept this as one more strange day in the billionaire's life. Eli hesitated at the threshold. Inside was warm leather, bottled water, and silence. Outside was cold pavement, garbage bags, and a mattress made of cardboard. He made his choice. He stepped in. The door shut behind him with a deep, quiet thud, the kind that seals not just sound, but fate. As the SUV pulled away from the curb, Blake watched Eli from the corner of his eye. The boy didn't speak. He sat stiffly, eyes darting between the window and the seat controls, like he didn't trust any of it to be real. Blake broke the silence. "I have a place in the hills," he said. "It's quiet. You'll have your own room. You can leave in the morning if you want." Eli glanced at him. "You do this often? Pick up stray kids and take them home?" Blake gave the faintest smile. "No," he said. "Just you." The SUV climbed slowly through the winding roads of the hills just outside the city. Towering trees arched above like silent guardians, their leaves rustling gently in the wind. The world grew quieter the farther they drove. Street lights gave way to moonlight. Concrete faded into cobblestone. Eli peered out the window, his breath fogging the glass slightly. He didn't speak. He didn't fidget. But his eyes were wide, quietly scanning every turn, like he needed to memorize the way back. Blake noticed, but said nothing. He remembered being that age, always watching for the exits. Finally, the car pulled into a long driveway flanked by iron gates. Motion sensors triggered soft ground lights, revealing a sprawling modern estate perched on a ridge. The mansion was sleek and glass-fronted, all sharp lines and subtle luxury. It didn't scream wealth, it whispered it. Eli's eyebrows lifted, just slightly. The SUV came to a smooth stop. Marcus opened the rear door. Eli hesitated only for a second this time before stepping out. The air was clean up here, colder, but not bitter. The kind of air that smelled like trees and stone and quiet. Blake led the way up the front steps, where a woman in her early 50s opened the door. Her posture was upright, her hair tied back, and her expression softened the moment she saw the boy. "Eli, this is Mary Ann," Blake said. "She runs the house." Mary Ann smiled warmly. "Welcome, sweetheart. You must be tired." Eli didn't respond. He stood half-shielded behind Blake, as if still unsure if this was kindness or a setup. Blake placed a hand on the boy's back, not pushing, just present. "Mary Ann, can you show him the guest room?" he asked gently. "And maybe set out some fresh clothes?" "Of course," she said. Eli followed her cautiously down the marble hallway. The mansion was quiet, not just in sound, but in spirit. The walls were lined with minimalist art, the furniture pristine. Everything felt untouched, like a museum or a life too carefully curated. It passed a sitting room, a study, and a dining area, large enough for 20 people, all empty. "Do you live here alone?" Eli asked quietly, glancing over his shoulder at Blake. Blake nodded, most of the time. Mary Ann opened the door at the end of the hallway. Inside was a guest room painted in warm tones, with a large window overlooking the trees, and a bed that looked impossibly soft. Fresh pajamas were laid out on the edge. A towel, too. A toothbrush, shampoo, even slippers. Eli didn't move at first. Then, slowly, he stepped inside. "You can lock the door if you want," Mary Ann said kindly. "Bathroom's just through there. I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything." She left him alone. Eli stood in the center of the room, unsure of what to do. He touched the bed, ran a hand over the folded blanket, opened the bathroom door, and stared at the mirror. His face looked foreign under the clean light. Dirty, small, alone. He took the longest shower of his life that night. The steam swallowed the cold. The scent of the soap reminded him of nothing, because he had nothing to compare it to. When he finally curled into the bed, he expected sleep to take a while. But the warmth, the silence, the safety, it wrapped around him like a lullaby. He was asleep in minutes. And for the first time in over a year, he didn't wake up shivering. It was nearly 2 a.m. when the first scream pierced the stillness. Blake sat upright in bed instantly, heart racing. For a moment, he didn't know what he'd heard, but then it came again. Muffled, strangled, a cry caught halfway between fear and pain. It was Eli. Without hesitation, Blake threw off the covers and moved swiftly through the dark hallway, barefoot and alert. The house, so silent just moments before, now felt alive with tension. He reached the guest room and knocked once, firmly but gently. "Eli?" No answer. He opened the door. The boy thrashed beneath the covers, tangled in sweat-soaked sheets. His face was contorted in distress, fists clenched tightly against his chest. He whimpered, not like a child, but like someone who had suffered too long and had no words left to scream. "Don't take her," Eli mumbled in his sleep. "Please don't take her." Blake stood frozen in the doorway for a second, unsure of the boundary. But then instinct overcame protocol. He stepped forward and gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Eli, it's okay. You're safe. You're dreaming." Eli jolted awake with a gasp, eyes wild. For a moment, he didn't recognize the room, the man, the bed, anything. He scrambled to sit up, panting, fists raised in defense. Hey, Blake said quickly, backing off just enough. "You're not in danger. You're in my house. Remember?" Eli blinked rapidly, trying to process, chest rising and falling in short, shallow breaths. "You had a nightmare," Blake added gently. "That's all." Silence fell. The boy's breathing slowed, but his eyes remained haunted, glazed with that terrible in-between state of waking up in a place too good to be true. Blake didn't press. He just stood there, giving him space. Finally, Eli spoke, barely above a whisper. "She was all I had." Blake sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, not too close. "Your mother?" he asked. Eli nodded once. She died in a hospital room, he said, his voice flat but hollow. I wasn't even allowed to sleep there the last night. They said visiting hours were over. He looked up, eyes glistening but refusing to let a single tear fall. I never got to say goodbye. Blake swallowed the lump forming in his own throat. He knew grief. He knew that kind of silence, the one that echoes forever. I'm sorry, Eli, he said. No one should carry that alone. Eli wiped his face roughly with his sleeve, embarrassed. I'm fine. It doesn't usually happen. I know, Blake said, but tonight it did, and it's okay. He stood again, ready to leave. But just before he reached the door, Eli's voice stopped him. Thanks for not walking away. Blake turned, and with a softness that didn't belong to billionaires, he replied, not this time. Then he quietly shut the door behind him, leaving the boy in the safety of moonlight and the comfort of knowing, for the first time in a long time, someone had stayed. The next morning dawned slowly over the hills, bathing the mansion in soft golden light. Sunlight filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, painting delicate patterns on the marble floors. The house, elegant and precise, felt a little less cold now, as if the presence of one small soul had changed its temperature. Blake sat in his study, a black coffee untouched at his side, fingers steepled beneath his chin. He had been up since sunrise. His mind, usually filled with quarterly reports and acquisition proposals, was elsewhere now. On Eli, the boy had slept through the rest of the night. Marianne had confirmed. He was still upstairs, quietly eating toast and eggs at the kitchen counter, asking nothing, expecting nothing. But Blake couldn't shake the images from the night before. The scream, the sweat, the heartbreak in his eyes. Blake had wealth, yes, more than he could ever spend. But what did that mean when a boy like Eli, sharp, resilient, aching for belonging, had slipped through every system designed to protect him? He couldn't just give him a warm bed for one night and return to his boardrooms. That would be cruelty disguised as kindness. And so he made a decision. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. Harriet, he said, when a voice answered. I need you to come by the house, urgently. Harriet Penrose had been his attorney for over a decade. Brilliant, ethical, discreet. She didn't ask questions. Child services? She asked calmly. Yes, Blake replied. We need to start the paperwork. There was a pause on the line. You're not adopting a dog, are you? Blake exhaled a rare laugh. No, a boy. Another pause. Longer, heavier. I'll be there in an hour. An hour later, Eli sat quietly across from Harriet in the sunroom, sipping a glass of orange juice, eyes flicking nervously between her and Blake. She was warm but professional, dressed in a deep green pantsuit, her notepad resting on her lap. Eli, she said gently, do you know why I'm here? I think so, he replied. You don't have to say yes to anything. We just want to explore options that might give you safety, consistency, and a future. Eli shrugged. I've heard that before. Usually means foster care. New rules. New people. New names. Blake stepped forward and sat beside him. No new name, he said. Not unless you want one. No one's forcing you into anything. But if you want to stay, not just for a night, but for as long as it takes, we can make that happen. Legally, properly. Eli looked at him. Not with gratitude. Not yet. But with something quieter, more powerful. Permission to hope. He glanced back at Harriet. And if I say no? You go back into the system, she answered honestly. Group home, placement evaluations. You're old enough to have some say now, but not all of it. Eli leaned back in his chair, chewing the inside of his cheek. Finally, he nodded once. I'll stay, he said, but not because I need charity. I want to finish something. Blake tilted his head. Finish what? Eli's eyes didn't waver. My mom always said I could be someone. I want to prove her right. Harriet smiled softly. Then let's get to work. And so, in a sun-drenched room that had never known such purpose, the legal gears began to turn, not to rescue Eli, not to claim him, but to finally give him the one thing he'd never had. A choice. The days that followed passed like pages, gently turning in a book Eli, didn't yet realize he was part of. Nothing extravagant happened. No grand speeches. No sudden transformations. But the small things, the quiet, consistent things, began to matter. Mary Ann started cooking breakfast for two instead of one. She left out Eli's favorite cereal beside the organic coffee Blake never drank. She laid out clothes in his size, carefully chosen, simple, comfortable, without brand names or loud colors. Nothing that would make him feel like he didn't belong. Blake, true to his word, didn't hover, but he was present. In the mornings, he joined Eli at the kitchen table for a few minutes before work, exchanging simple words, not interrogations, just invitations. How did you sleep? Any thoughts on lunch? Ever been inside a real tech lab? Eli answered sparsely at first, but each day, the walls cracked a little more. Blake noticed something else too. The boy was curious, intensely so. He would linger near the office when Blake took business calls, silently absorbing. One afternoon, Blake found him in the library, poring over a book on computer engineering he hadn't touched in years. "You're into tech?" Blake asked from the doorway. Eli looked up, startled, then shrugged. "I like figuring out how things work, especially broken things." Blake smiled. "That's where all the best engineers start." They didn't talk long, but Blake ordered a refurbished laptop that night. Nothing flashy, just functional, and left it on Eli's bed with a sticky note that read, "Explore freely." Eli didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. His silence was shifting, no longer heavy with distrust, but filled with concentration, purpose. And then came the day Blake didn't expect. It was late afternoon. Blake was on a video call in his study when he heard a soft knock. Eli stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, looking unsure. "I'm not interrupting?" Blake muted the call and shook his head. "What's up?" Eli scratched the back of his neck. "I was thinking, if I'm staying here for a while, maybe I should start school again?" Blake blinked. "You want to go back to school?" "Yeah," Eli said quickly. "Not some institution. A real one. With teachers who don't scream. With books. Science, math. You know, real stuff." Blake smiled slowly, deeply. "Then that's exactly what we'll find." That night, after Eli had gone to bed, Blake stood by the window of his study, staring out at the moonlit forest. He wasn't a father. Not officially. Not yet. But for the first time in years, his home no longer felt like a monument to success. It felt like a place where something new was beginning. Starting over wasn't easy. Not for Eli. Not for Blake. Eli's enrollment into school came with raised eyebrows and private conversations. Wealth didn't erase paperwork, and despite Blake's reputation and resources, there were questions. Where was this boy found? Why is a billionaire suddenly his guardian? Is this charity? Or something else? But Harriet handled the legal noise. And Blake? He didn't care about the whispers. What mattered was that Eli walked into his new school wearing clean clothes, a backpack of his own, and, for the first time in years, a name on the roll call that didn't make him feel invisible. The first weeks were rough. Eli sat alone at lunch. Teachers misread his quietness for disinterest. Some classmates mocked his thrift store shoes, or the fact that he didn't know how to log into the school portal. But he didn't complain. He came home every afternoon, dropped his backpack by the door, and headed straight to the library or the laptop in his room. Sometimes Blake would pass by and find him scribbling notes, watching tutorials, dismantling an old keyboard just to put it back together. Eli wasn't fast, but he was relentless. He struggled with essays, but excelled in numbers. Math became a language he understood when people didn't make sense. He didn't make friends easily, but one teacher, Mr. Rhodes, a quiet science instructor with a weathered voice, noticed something in him. "Your son's got a mind built for blueprints and circuits," he told Blake during a parent meeting. "He's not my son," Blake replied automatically. But then he paused and added quietly, "Not yet." At home, the rhythm of life became real. Eli set the table for dinner without being asked. Mary Ann taught him how to make scrambled eggs without burning them. On Sunday mornings, he helped Blake reorganize the garage, questioning the design of every tool. He had bad days too, nights when he shut his door and didn't come out. Flashbacks that left him wordless. A time he panicked when someone yelled too loudly during gym and didn't explain why. But the difference now was this. He had a safe place to fall apart. And slowly, the victories added up. He aced his first math exam. He fixed Marianne's blender without YouTube. He got a B+ on a science project and didn't stop smiling for 2 days. One night, after dinner, Blake found him sitting outside on the back steps, staring at the stars. Thinking about space? Blake asked, lowering himself beside him. Eli shook his head. Thinking about time. Time? Yeah, how it used to go so slow when I was hungry, he said. Now it feels like it's racing. Blake nodded. That's what happens when you start living instead of surviving. Eli turned to him, a quiet seriousness in his voice. Do you think it's okay that I'm starting to feel happy again? Blake looked at him for a long moment. I think it's exactly what your mother would have wanted. And with that, Eli leaned his head against Blake's shoulder, not as a guest, not as a burden, but as someone who, perhaps for the first time, was beginning to feel like he truly belonged. The auditorium was packed. Parents filled every seat. Teachers lined the aisles. Cell phones were raised like tiny lighthouses, capturing a moment that would be replayed again and again for years to come. On the stage, a banner read, Class of the Future, Class of Today. Blake sat near the front, dressed in a tailored suit, but far more relaxed than usual. No boardroom tension. No shareholders to impress. Only one person mattered today, and he was stepping onto the stage. Eli, now 17, he stood tall and lean in his graduation gown. His hair was a little longer, his face more defined. He moved with a quiet confidence, not the loud kind that demands attention, but the kind earned through surviving storms most never see. As he approached the podium, the room fell into respectful silence. He took a deep breath. For a moment, he stared down at the speech in his hands. Then, slowly, he folded it and placed it aside. I was going to read something I wrote, he began, voice steady but low, but I changed my mind. A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. I wasn't supposed to be here, he continued. Not in this school, not on this stage, not anywhere. Murmurs faded. All eyes were fixed on him now. 3 years ago, I was sleeping behind a restaurant. I was hungry, angry, alone. I didn't trust anyone, especially not men in expensive suits. Light laughter echoed. Even Blake smiled at that one. But then someone stopped, Eli said, scanning the crowd until his eyes found Blake. He didn't throw money at me. He didn't ask me what was wrong. He just saw me. He paused. The room was still. And that changed everything. I didn't become perfect overnight. I still mess up. I still wake up scared sometimes. But I've learned that people aren't just stories waiting to be judged. They're journeys waiting to be walked with. A few teachers wiped their eyes. My mother once told me I could become someone, he said, his voice trembling just slightly. I didn't believe her for a long time, but now I do. He looked directly at Blake, because someone else believed it too. A moment of stillness, and the auditorium exploded with applause. Blake stood slowly, clapping with quiet pride, his eyes glistening. He didn't wave, didn't cheer. He just looked at Eli with a kind of warmth no money could ever buy. And for Eli, that was enough, because today wasn't just about a diploma. It was about everything that came before it, and everything that would come after. The applause still echoed in Blake's ears, long after the ceremony had ended. Guests trickled out of the auditorium in cheerful waves, arms full of flowers, balloons, and proud tears. But Blake remained still in his seat for a moment longer, watching Eli speak with classmates, laughing, shaking hands, being pulled into group photos he once would have avoided. He looked free. As the sun dipped low over the school courtyard, casting a golden warmth over the graduates, Eli walked up to Blake holding his diploma, not with arrogance, but with wonder, like he still couldn't quite believe it was real. Ready to go? Blake asked. Eli grinned. Not yet. There's something I want to do first. They drove back into the city, not to the mansion or to any celebration, but to a quiet neighborhood Eli hadn't returned to in years. He directed Blake to park near a narrow alley behind a row of old buildings. The same alley, the same dumpster, the same spot where it all began. The place where Eli had once been nothing more than a boy, wrapped in hunger, fear, and dirt. He stepped out of the car alone. In his hand, he carried a brown paper bag. Inside it, a fresh sandwich, a bottle of water, and a handwritten note that simply read, "You matter. Keep going." Blake stayed by the car, watching in silence as Eli placed the bag beside a small pile of flattened cardboard tucked under a broken fire escape. No one was there today. But that wasn't the point. Eli stood still for a long minute, his gaze resting not on the spot, but on the boy he used to be. And then, with a quiet breath, he turned and walked back to the car. When he got in, Blake looked at him with a quiet question in his eyes. Eli answered before it was asked. "I thought maybe someone like me might pass through here someday. And maybe they'll know someone's already been where they are and made it out." Blake nodded slowly. There was nothing else to say, just a fullness in his chest, pride, peace, and something deeper. They drove off without fanfare, the city lights beginning to flicker awake around them. That night, back at the house, Eli placed his diploma on a shelf in the study, next to a framed photo of his mother. In it, she was laughing, her arms wrapped around a younger version of him, a moment frozen in time. He touched the frame gently. "I did it," he whispered. Behind him, Blake stood in the doorway. "You ready for what's next?" he asked. Eli turned. "College, internships, a life. And if someone ever asks where it all started?" Eli smiled. "In an alley," he said. "But the real story starts the moment someone stopped and didn't walk away. Kindness doesn't require wealth. It only takes someone willing to see the invisible and stay." If you enjoyed this video, let us know in the comments. Your opinion is very important to us. Don't forget to subscribe. A big hug, and see you in the next video.